So I'm going to get started. You'll have to forgive my voice a little bit. I'm overcoming a bit of a cold, but I'm here. And I'm here to talk about language-oriented programming, shifting paradigms. Now, how many of you have heard of domain-specific languages? I'm guessing most of you probably have. Come on, don't be shy. You've certainly heard of domain-specific languages sometime pretty recently. This is one of those topics that's on what I refer to as a slow burn, in that you've been hearing about this for 2 years, and you've been hearing for 2 years now that this is going to be the thing that's going to cure cancer and revolutionize software development, and it's a better floor wax and a dessert topping, and it cures all ills. And that's not exactly true, but the reason you've been hearing about this so long is because it is still gaining in prominence. And I work for ThoughtWorks, and our chief scientist is Martin Fowler, and he's been working on a Patterns of DSLs book for a couple of years now, and he expects to work on it for 2 more years, but that is an indicator of how mature our thinking about domain-specific languages has become, that you can write a patterns book about it. Now, through this keynote, I'm going to try to answer a few questions that you may have thought to yourself at some point as you've been doing Java development. Like, why is there so much XML mixed in with my Java? It seems like you spend half your day now writing XML rather than writing Java, and there's got to be a good reason for that. I'm also going to answer the question, why do things like aspects exist in the Java world? Why do we need this? I'm also going to answer the question that's a really burning question in the US, and I'm guessing only slightly here, is why won't everybody shut up about Ruby on Rails? There's got to be some reason why people are so excited about Ruby on Rails. When was the last time someone came running up to you and said, I just discovered this new thing, it's called Java Server Faces, you've got to try it, it's the best thing ever? That almost never happens, but you hear people, annoying people, come up to you and talk about Ruby on Rails all the time, and there's got to be some reason why they're so excited about that. Mostly, though, what I'm going to be talking about is an evolutionary step beyond frameworks in some ways. Let's talk about that, but I'm going to start completely on a different level. I was thinking about completely in left field. Does that make sense here? Left field? That's a popular expression in the U.S. meaning that completely non sequitur, kind of unusual place to start. And I'm going to start with classical art. There was a time period back in ancient Greece that was defined by classical art. And classical art is a way of producing art that had very specific kinds of materials. It had very specific kinds of subject matter, mostly around mythology, certain kinds of techniques that artists used to create works of art. These are all things that came about in what we call the classical era of art. And if you take someone who knows a lot about art, they can look at a piece of art, a statue or a painting, and say, oh, that's from the classical era. And then a bunch of time passes. And there's like a Black Plague and some other stuff, which I'm not really going to talk about. But then the Renaissance occurred. And the main work of art that you see from the Renaissance is Madonna and Child. My wife and I went to the Louvre a couple of years ago, and we walked into the Renaissance art gallery, and we saw, oh, look, a Madonna with Child, and Madonna and Child, and Madonna and Child, and Madonna and Child. And by the time we got to the end of the hallway, we were sick of seeing paintings of Madonna and Child. Because that's the subject that people created art around during the Renaissance. And then there was a period called the Enlightenment. And what they did in the Enlightenment was revisit the subjects from classical art. But they revisited it in a very specific way. They used the same kind of techniques and subject matters, but they had much better materials to work with, because we're in the 1700s by now. And so the paints were better, and the sculpting tools were better, and the ways, the paints that they could use for vases were much better. They used the same kind of ideas from classical art in what was called neoclassical art. Same kind of subject matters, but with improved tools. So why in the world am I talking about art when we're supposed to be talking about technology? Well, when you think about art in this way, what you're really talking about are abstraction styles. Ways of abstracting this problem of I want to capture an invis on canvas or a statue or something like that. And as developers, we deal with abstractions too. In fact, we spend our entire day dealing with abstractions because you don't think about when you're using your computer, when you're using a folder and copying a file from one folder to another, you don't really think about, oh, well, that's really ones and zeros on a spinning magnetic platter that's doing this work. You think in terms of that abstraction of file system. Because thinking about it as ones and zeros is just too low level. It's not useful to think about it at such a low level. What we do instead is build abstractions. And we constantly do this in software because we keep running into problems that it's too low level of abstraction. So we build cleaner, simpler abstractions on top of that to allow us to get stuff done. Abstractions show up in a bunch of different places, and here's a good example of one. Some abstractions last a really long time. What is this? Surely most of the people here recognize this. It's C. You'll notice that as Java developers, Java looks an awful lot like this because that was a really useful abstraction style that Kernighan and Ritchie created when they created C. So some of these abstractions last a really long time and in fact get copied into new places. Some abstractions don't fare quite so well. How many people recognize this? Of course, there's a dead giveaway up at the top. This is Ada. And this abstraction style came and went in a big hurry, which is probably not a bad thing, all things considered. But what happens every time that we take one of these abstraction styles and then we eventually move on to another one, we keep some of the good things from the previous abstraction style. Things like variables and the absence of go-tos and lexical scoping and garbage collection are all things that we've kind of carried forward as we keep building new abstractions on top of the work that we do. And there's one abstraction that has become extraordinarily popular in the Java world, and that is building code by using frameworks. Because that's what we do as Java developers. We use frameworks to build stuff. That's our preferred abstraction style in the Java world. But in fact, so much so that I will contend that Java is not an object-oriented language. It's not an object-oriented language in the same way that C is not a particular kind of language. Because if you go back to 1968, Edgar Dijkstra did a conference presentation at the ACM that almost caused a riot. And what did he say that got people so excited and so up in arms?